Hello, I'm James Avery. Welcome to the History Makers Talking Truth, a series featuring inspirational stories and words of wisdom from famous African Americans. What you're about to hear are stories from men and women who've managed to achieve success in spite of extraordinary odds. They're stories about sheer determination and finding strength in unexpected places. We hope they will inspire you and give you the courage to believe that there is nothing, absolutely nothing that can hold you back.
My mother had high hopes for all of her kids. It wasn't even hopes. She knew that we were all going to be a success at something, or she was going to kill us. You know, because she used to say, I'm not raising no dummies, and whatever you do, because even when we were kids, you know, she'd say, you know, you don't half-ass do anything. If you're going to do something, do it right. Give it everything you've got. I don't care what it is. And she used to tell you that. I don't care if I tell you to iron this shirt, don't half-ass iron it. Don't just iron the collar in the front just because you're not going to see the back. Iron the shirt right. Basically, you know, my publisher was all thrilled and everything when they bought the book. And, you know, at the time, there were a number of other writers, white writers, being published that were on the lecture circuit, the talk show circuit, and all this. So I just assumed the same thing was going to happen to me. That's how naive I was. And so when they bought my book, and then I said, you know, like, I know I wanted to know how many cities am I going to, and, you know, am I going on a book tour? No. And I was like, what? No. We don't have it in the budget. And I knew then, I mean, it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. But I was like, wait a minute. I know I just moved here from California, where I didn't really experience what I would call overt racism, but this is it, in the flesh, right here. And I was like, I am not having this.
Terry McMillan took matters in her own hands.
I had a book of my own called How to Get Halfway Published. And for some reason, something just ding went off in my head. And I opened that book, and sure enough, there was a whole section in there about how to be your own publicist. I ended up sort of creating my own little marketing strategy, whereby I basically wrote letters. So the bottom line is I did all the work myself, but I did not try to shove my book down anybody's throat. I did it in what I thought was a very classy way, and apparently it worked because the heads of some of the major chains like Barnes & Noble or whatever ended up calling the heads of my publishing company, the head of my publishing company, and said, who is this kid?
Terry McMillan would go on to even greater success. Her book, Waiting to Exhale, would sell nearly 4 million copies and spend months on the New York Times bestseller list. That book, and McMillan's next bestseller, How Stella Got Her Groove Back, would become major motion pictures.
When my movie came out, payback is a bitch. That's how I look at it. You know? That's exactly how I look at it.
I love study because I wanted to be a doctor. I was taking the subjects that, you know, led to that. When I reached 9th grade, you know, you start reaching puberty, noticing girls and things. I was noticing that, hey, I got holes in my shoes, I got patches in my pants. I can't dress like the other guys. I was so intimidated, I dropped out of school. A delegation of teachers came over to my house. And they said, Miss Wade, my grandmother, Do you know Isaac has been out of school 6 weeks. What? She looked at me. I dropped my head, you know, as if to say, wait till they leave, with her head spinning. I said, I know I'm gonna get it when they leave, oh my goodness. They said, we don't want to lose this young man. So he has so much to offer. So we're gonna help him stay in school.
Thanks to a group of caring teachers, Isaac Hayes stayed in school. They gave him clothes to wear and helped boost his confidence. And it was there in school that Hayes was introduced to his future career.
Remember, I wanted to be a doctor, but a talent show came up. They were auditioning people to be on a talent show, and I was so shy. They said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to sing. Little boy, you want to sing? Yes, ma'am. What you gonna sing? I said, Looking Back by Nat King Cole. So I started singing. I finished. I got a big applause from the people that's walking around in there. Miss Harvey came and said, wow, little boy, you're good. You gonna see, yeah, you're gonna be in the show tomorrow. I'm gonna put you in the show.
But before the big show, Hayes got some unusual advice that would pay off big time.
I remember going to the cotton fields, and so this wino said, Bubba, I hear you on a talent show. Gonna be on a talent show. Let me tell you what you do. When you get to the bridge, climax of the song, take that mic and fall down on your knees. The next day, did a talent contest. I got to the bridge, bam. Fell on my knees and girls screamed, the house went crazy. Of course, I won. I won a talent contest. And then, girls started running up to me for autographs. Girls 2 grades ahead of me. And I mean, good-looking girls. Wow, this singing thing is cool. So, career change. I want to be an entertainer.
From school talent show to superstar, Isaac Hayes would become a legendary singer, songwriter, and composer. He topped Billboard charts and won numerous awards, including an Oscar for music he wrote for the 1971 film Shaft. The honor made him the first African-American artist to win an Academy Award for Best Musical Score. Hayes has also performed in numerous films and TV shows, including South Park.
We need to reach back and protect the young, upcoming blacks and not let them get in the wrong path at an early age. Education is key.
My mother used to say to me that I was not to come home and complain about being refused something or not being able to attain something because I was black. She would say, if a white boy can do it, you can do it, and you can do it better. If you don't do it better, don't come home. And she'd laugh after that, but she meant what she said. I had suffered the discrimination in Washington the first day I was there. I was refused in Garfinkel's department store, refused at a restaurant, refused at a theater, couldn't go in a white theater. I was angry, you know, seething, you know.
The year was 1942. Our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And it was Gordon Parks' first day on the job as a photographer for the Farm Security Administration. He was out on assignment for his boss, Roy Emerson Stryker.
He knew that it was going to upset me, and he wanted to see how I'd react to it. He asked me, how did it go? I said, well, you know how it went. He said, well, what'd you bring a camera down here for? I said, well, I don't know. What's that got to do with it? And he said, you know, talk to some other black people down here, older people especially, who've been through all their lives what you went through this afternoon, and turn your camera against it. Now, you just can't photograph a bigot and write bigot underneath his photograph, because bigots have a way of looking like, like anybody else, and sometimes even better. He said, so you have to get at the root of bigotry.
Stryker went home that night, and Gordon Parks was left all alone. Or so he thought. There was another person in the building, a cleaning woman.
I asked her name, and she told me her name, and I said, well, could you tell me a little about your life? Her daughter had died from childbirth, and she was now taking care of her kids, on a salary that she could hardly support herself on.
Parks asked her if he could photograph her. She said yes, and the picture became one of his masterpieces. The photograph spoke of our nation's inequality, but also of the strength and power of the human spirit.
3 days later, when Stryker saw it, he said, well, you got the right idea, but you're going to get us all fired. So he was first, I suppose, to make me realize that the camera could be used as a weapon against discrimination and bigotry.
Gordon Parks would continue to fight discrimination and bigotry. He gained fame as an award-winning photographer, with his work appearing in Life magazine, Glamour, and Vogue. Parks also became a composer, writer, and filmmaker, directing such movies as The Learning Tree and Shaft.
I feel as though we're all allowed a certain time upon this planet, and we should do what we could while we're here to improve it, so that when we leave it, we've left something for someone else.
I am perhaps the only person you've ever met who flunked kindergarten. Absolutely, flunked it, whatever the first grade was. I just flunked it. I don't know why or how, but I remember vividly coming home from school that day. Mother was cleaning up the house. She was getting ready to go to work. She looked at the card, and she was a very attractive woman. She never went out of the house without dressing completely. She grabbed the first hat she could find and threw on some shoes and took me by the hand and walked out of the house. And when we got to school, Mother said, I guess a person today would say, I want to see the principal or whatever. She said, who taught this boy? That's one of the questions she wanted to know, who taught this boy? And finally it was determined that some woman down the hall taught me. And she dragged me by the hand. I didn't want to see this confrontation. But she dragged me by the hand. She went into the room and she said, did you teach this boy? And she said, yes. And she said that you're either incompetent or you're a fool. And then, having said that, she pulled me out, and we walked back up Lynch Street, and she took me to St. Mark's Episcopal School. She never said that I was supposed to do well, but I got the point, you know. I got the point. Always, never she'd say I was supposed to be good or we were supposed to be able to read and write, but it was the understanding that I was supposed to do that.
Lerone Bennett went from that humbling experience to become one of the nation's leading African-American scholars. After graduating from Morehouse College, Bennett launched his career as a journalist. In 1958, he was appointed senior editor of Ebony magazine, and today he serves as executive director. Bennett has also written critically acclaimed books on American history and the Black experience.
I think still, chauvinistically, that African Americans are potentially the most creative people politically and culturally in the world. For 400 years, they've been trying to destroy us. It has proved impossible. We are very resilient people. And despite everything that's happened to us, we're still in that plugging and still in that creating, still in that doing all sorts of things. It's an interesting fact that nobody has said anything new in music in this country for the last 40 years except black people, the hip-hop generation.
There had been one African-American woman at USC, none at UCLA or Berkeley. And I had a friend who had been trying to get into USC, who had very good grades, and she had not been able to get into USC Law School. And my mother, who was really could come up with all kinds of things, she said, and you had to send your picture in. So she just found an overexposed picture, attached it to the application, and we sent it in. And I got into law school, and I was the first African-American woman since 1928 who had gotten into that law school. There's nothing worse than people who are miserable in their lives, who are doing things they really don't want to do, who are around people they don't want to be around, and who feel the pressures are such that they have to do it. I really think everyone has to find themselves.
Right after USC Law School, Yvonne took the California State Bar. She did secretarial work at a law firm while waiting to hear if she passed the examination.
When I got my news that I had passed the bar, they asked me to stay on as a secretary. They said, "You're not going to be able to make a living or anything." I said, "Well, I'm going to take a chance." So I just went out, I found an office, and I went to work on my own.
If Yvonne Brathwaite Burke had stayed on as a secretary and not followed her dreams, her life would have been considerably different. She became California's first African-American assemblywoman and later the first ever to be elected to Congress from that state. Today, she serves as chairperson of the LA County Board of Supervisors. By the way, she also was the first black woman to hold that position.
Unfortunately, there were no women in politics for me to try to emulate. So I didn't really have a chance to say, okay, I'm going to be like that person. I just decided, well, there's room out there for me. Now, my attitude is, if someone can do it, then why can't I do it? I should be able to try to do it.
I beat somebody bad in the classroom and just terrorized people. I ended up going to court, and they gave me one last chance, and that was to go to an alternative school. And I think that happened when I was 14, 15 years old, somewhere around there. I spent almost 2 years there, and I got a lot of discipline. There were guys that were much bigger than me, and I understood the kinds of people that I was dealing with, hustlers, pimps, drug dealers. I was very much convinced that I didn't want to be there. And I had to find some meaningful way to get out of this thing. And that's when I did very well in sports. I jumped 24 feet, 1 inch in the Junior Olympics, and set a Junior Olympic record, which took me to another level. Picture in the paper, all the high schools were interested in me.
For perhaps the first time, Beeman realized he had a shot at changing his life.
I went to one particular school, and my stepfather went with me, because I think he was at that time really proud that I did something. I told him I wanted to go back to regular school. I didn't want to go to the alternative school anymore. And was there any way that we could get this done?
There was. The track coach at Jamaica High School in New York welcomed Beeman with open arms.
I brought this picture, which was a full page of me at the time was the New York Mirror in the sports section. And I was so excited. And when I gave him this picture, his eyes just lit up like a Christmas tree. He kind of walked to the principal's office and said that I'd like to admit him into this school, and we'd like to take a chance with him. And from that point on, it was just a wonderful experience at Jamaica High School.
Beeman thrived as a student and as an athlete. In 1968, he qualified for the Olympics in Mexico City.
I felt that I was well prepared. I was willing to jump in rain, snow, sleet, whatever it would take, I was going to win. And so that day, October 18th, 1968, I stood up at the runway and I said that I'm not going to be denied being a champion on this day.
Beamon took the jump that would be remembered in sports history.
I was between time and space. There was no time to respond. There was no time to react. I just was in the midst somewhere that I can't comprehend.
He knew the jump was good. He just didn't know how good.
The measuring device was actually too small, and so they had to come in with manual tape. I had broken the Olympic record by 3 feet and broke the world record by almost 2 feet.
Beamon became the first man to jump more than 9.5 yards. He had set a record that would stand for 23 years.
I had gotten a gold medal, I had broken a world record and then on top of that, I had gone way beyond the distance. So I was like, wow. So I was on cloud 9. I had everything I wanted.
I read this article about Nancy Reynolds, a woman who was an anchor at Channel 5, a very good friend of Ronald Reagan's. In this column, they said she's rumored to want this job as Ronald Reagan's press secretary. And if she did, 2 and 2, she couldn't be Ronald Reagan's press secretary and stay in that job. So that day, I called the station to ask about the job. They hadn't even read the paper yet. Eventually, along with 64 people, I got interviewed for that job. And so it was touch and go. I just thought, well, they're not going to hire me, too. You know, nobody in LA has hired anybody black. Nobody else in this tower has hired anybody black. So they're not going to hire me. So when I got the phone call that said they were, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it.
In 1965, Davis became the first African-American female reporter on the West Coast. However, not everyone welcomed her with open arms.
A lot of racism still, you know, a lot of go back to Africa letters, things like that. And my hardest job, though, was working with my colleagues. It was winning their confidence and their trust. And I worked very hard at that, but it was difficult. It was particularly hard with the photographers. The story was that I would last until I saw my first dead body. I was proud of the fact I didn't faint. And then I had another test. I had a real jockey of a photographer that I'd go out with that really loved the police beat. And I went out with him one day, and the police were involved in a chase with actual bullets being fired from the car they were chasing. And he is driving along, and I'm sitting beside him. He's got his 16mm Bell & Howell that he is holding out the window, and I'm holding the steering wheel while he's pressing down on the pedal and the other guy is shooting. It really did help me that I was able to hold it together through that. So I was proud of myself for doing that.
Hard work and perseverance kept Belva Davis Moore in television news and public affairs programming, and she's still at it after 4 decades. Her many awards include 6 regional Emmys and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences.
I wrote a little line that I used to repeat like a mantra, and it was, don't be afraid of the space between your dreams and reality. If you can dream it, you can make it so.
My manager said, listen, Bill, there's a part that's available if you want it in this Broadway play that's just going to open up, soon. And they're just starting the rehearsals, but they need, a black person, a male, to do one of the roles. So I went there, and the script was about this bellhop or porter or something like that, acting something like Stephen Fetchit, The whole thing was such a revolting experience for me. I was sick to my stomach. So I just walked out of the theater, and that was the end of it. I just told my agent to tell him to forget it. But that helped me to understand the kind of violence that was being done to the American psyche by these various producers who were putting on these productions that were full of stereotypes of one kind or another.
Greaves left Broadway to study filmmaking.
In the process of going to film school, I read a wonderful book by the major pioneer of documentary films, a man by the name of John Grierson. He wrote a book called Grierson on Documentary. Wonderful book, and talked about how documentary film could be used as a social tool or as a weapon against ignorance. Anyway, the bottom line of it all is that he was the person chosen to set up the National Film Board of Canada during the Second World War. And so after the war was over, this National Film Board was a flourishing documentary film organization. I wanted to go and work there as an intern or apprentice, and I didn't have any money.
He applied for a fellowship to work at the National Film Board of Canada, but he ran into a roadblock with the American organization handing out the grants.
They never heard of a black person wanting to get behind the camera and make movies. I said, to hell with it, I'm going to go up there anyway. So I went up to Canada and took odd jobs in the evenings, scrubbing floors and washing windows and all kinds of things, just to be at the film board. And finally, the people at the film board decided I was really motivated to become a filmmaker. And they took me on first as an apprentice and then as an assistant director, assistant editor. Then I moved inexorably through the different skills and disciplines. And then I became a writer and a director at the film board. And altogether, I was involved in something like 80 films.
Greaves returned to the United States almost 10 years later.
I came back because I was very inspired by the change of the atmosphere, the climate, the racial climate of America. I was very taken by Martin Luther King and Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier were getting on the tube and talking about the race problem. I mean, these were all people I knew and grew up with. And so I felt that, you know, America has possibilities as a country.
William Greaves became one of America's top documentary filmmakers. He's won numerous awards throughout his career, including 70 International Film Festival Awards and an Emmy. In 1980, he was also inducted into the Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame.
People say to me, my goodness, how come you're still making films? You bet your sweet life I'm still making films. I'm making films because there's so much untruths out there that it has to be corrected.
The schools were segregated, the restaurants were segregated, transportation was segregated, housing was segregated. So I grew up in a segregated world where people called us strange names. We couldn't drink out of the water fountains unless it said colored. We couldn't use the restrooms unless it said colored. We went to the movies, we had to sit in the balcony, and on and on and on. My parents gave me a good foundation. My father was a stern man, my mother was more loving. Probably fairly typical, I suppose, of families in those days. And I understood that education was the only thing they could give me to protect myself. I knew that integration and desegregation have nothing to do with quality education. What you have to do is remove educational discrimination. And that condition can exist no matter what the complexion of the players are, be they black or white, and it's all based on what the teachers do. In segregation, my teachers were segregated too. They rode the back of those same buses. They knew that through this process of education, superior education, the little George McKennas of the world would set the rest of them free. Because it had to be my generation, and along with them, I have to give everybody their credit, that would come along and whatever it took for us to do to move society to a new agenda.
McKenna went on to earn a master's degree in mathematics at Loyola University in Southern California. But as much as he enjoyed higher math, he soon learned he had a passion for teaching.
I was at Jordan High School in Watts. It was a wonderful experience. I loved it. Like a rabbit in a briar patch. The kids were poor, they were needy, they were smart, they needed hope, they believed in what you told them, you could inspire them. When you teach children of poverty, they look at you as somebody they'd like to become. That's a big difference. And they hang on to you in a personal way because their respect level is a lot different. And when you realize that you're probably the strongest influence on this child's life, particularly by the time they get to high school, because that's the period of time that'll make or break them. They'll become a dropout or they'll become a graduate, and it's on you. And you have to make a great investment in them.
George McKenna's commitment to education is well known. The story of his job as principal at one school became a television movie. The school was once considered one of the worst in Los Angeles, but under his leadership, the percentage of graduates going on to college rose to 80%. McKenna has received hundreds of awards and honors, including induction into the National Alliance of Black School Educators Hall of Fame.
You save lives when you're a teacher, and you do it every day. You almost do it so frequently that you don't remember. It's like being a doctor who does heart surgery every day. You can't remember all of it. You just know you've been fixing hearts all your life. And that's all you do, and it's such important work.
Well, I grew up in a gospel singing family. The Drinkards are my aunts and uncles, my mother's brothers and sisters. And they were, and still are, very, very much involved in our church activities. They still sing at functions. So my background is gospel music. And my mom, being the eldest of her family, she basically was the manager of the group and made sure that they got to where they had to go and got paid, all that important stuff. You know, my mom's group were at the Apollo Theater on a gospel show, and we happened to be at one of the shows listening to the music, and a man ran in frantically, I mean really frantic. We need singers, and they wanted to take either my mother's group or the Davis sisters who happened to be on the show, the Imperials who were also on the show. Of course, they couldn't leave the Apollo to go do some background work. So Big Mouth here said, we can do it. Never knowing what background was or anything of that nature. It's like, what did I commit ourselves to doing? But as it turned out, it was a date at Savoy Records in Newark, New Jersey. And that was our first experience of oohing and ahhing and yeah behind secular music.
Dionne Warwick was barely in her teens, but her courage to believe she could do it would lead her to incredible success. During her career, she recorded an astonishing 30 hit singles and about 20 best-selling albums. In 1980, Warwick became the first artist ever to win Grammy Awards in both the pop and R&B categories.
What is the legacy that you'd like to leave?
Oh my goodness. I'd just like to be remembered as being me.
Well, that's a lot.
Because I am who I am. I am always, I mean, this is the package. I don't care if you see me a day from now or a year from now. And that's why I don't have wrinkles, and that's probably why you don't either. Because you don't have to stop and think about how you were with this person at that particular time.
Well, I'll have to say that's true about you. Absolutely.
And, you know, first, I like me. I really do. I had to grow to like me, but I do. I like me a lot. And I know there are places and areas that need attending to and changing that I will be working on. You know, but I got a lot of time to do that. And I just feel that if I have to be remembered for anything, she was always Dionne.
When the war was going on, 1945, I was in high school. I'm going to finish in June or May, I forget, but I was going to turn 18 in July. And everybody's going to war. People you knew were dying. So I figured, keep in mind now, I'm little, I'm 17 years old, people are dying, and in my head, the way to stay alive is to be well trained. And so therefore I wanted to be a Marine. Because the Marine Corps was an elite corps. We took off from Jersey City. There were a lot of white fellas and one other black besides me. And since he was 19, I was 18, they gave him the orders for the two of us. And I'm writing postcard after postcard after postcard because I'm so proud I'm gonna be a Marine. And thereby I remembered the itinerary. Fortunately, because this clown missed the train in Washington. And so now I'm on the train, he's not there, I got no ticket, no orders, no nothing. So when the conductor would come through, I say, I'm with them, I'm with them. Anyway, I finally got to Jacksonville, North Carolina. The sergeant said, where are your orders, boy? And I tried to explain that this other fella, I got like 3 words out before he hit me. And I bounced off the ground. That was my introduction to the United States Marine Corps.
After 13 months in the Marines, David Dinkins was honorably discharged.
I had, I don't know how much money, maybe $200 or $300, you know, severance pay, and I'm ready to party. I wanted to go to New York. And my stepmother, who was a Howard graduate, class of 29, and she said, no, you need to go to college. She was concerned that I would just go off and quote, never make anything of myself. And she and my father and my mother, they were all insistent.
The insistence paid off. Dinkins went to Howard University.
Up to the last year or so, my motto was don't let your education interfere with your recreation. So, but by the time I got to be a junior and I realized I had to have a major, and I saw I had more math courses than anything else, so I started to concentrate on math and physics. And I got my degree, and then I won a fellowship to Rutgers University in math. By then I was real serious. I did fairly well. I finished 1 semester and you know, I got okay grades. And one day, though, we had a problem. I did this homework. I stayed up all night struggling. Came to class the next day, and I went to the smartest person in the class, of course, was a woman. I said, did you get the answer to number 2? She said, yeah, it's pi over 3. I said, that's what I got. And then on reflection, I said, how long did it take you? She said, about 20 minutes. I had studied all night. So I knew that that was not what I was cut out to do.
He left the math program, but he couldn't give up the idea of graduate school. He decided to try an entirely different field.
I thought that law school would be a good foundation for anything.
For a man who eventually became New York City's first African-American mayor, it was an excellent foundation. Sometimes success is being open to possibilities, whether it be in the workforce, the armed services, or higher education. The key is to continue to strive. David Dinkins went on to teach at the Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. He's on the board of the American Stock Exchange and is a member of many organizations, including the Council on Foreign Relations.
Some blacks who achieved early on are entitled to an awful lot more than some of us who came along later, for the reason that we were able to build on that which they had accomplished. Look at the Tuskegee Airmen. A lot of these wonderful men came along at a time when they said, first of all, you blacks aren't intelligent enough to fly. Then when they proved they could fly, they said, well, yeah, but you can't fight. Then they not only fought, they fought so well that the white bomber pilots said, we want those black guys to protect us, because they never, ever lost a bomber, not one. But the fact that they were successful, I mean, this stuff is all intertwined. And so it truly is a fact that everybody stands on somebody's shoulders.
My mother went to the 12th grade, which was sort of unusual during those days. And she was a school teacher and what we would call a very, very literate person. She read the Bible a lot. She taught me poems. She taught us all about life, and her philosophy of life was if one works hard and honors God, you will get to achieve. There wasn't really a way a woman of her intelligence could make it during that time. They didn't have laundries then, so she would go and get bundles of clothes from the white families, and she would wash them in a big old tub till the clothes got clean and boiled, and she would wash them until they were just as white as snow. She could put them in the hottest of water to do what she had to do. So she was really a worker, my mother was.
Carrie Meek's mother wanted the family to have a better life, but it wouldn't be easy. They were very poor, and Carrie was one of 12 children.
My mother was so strong in that she said, each one of you is going to get an education. And the boys didn't seem to want it because they weren't used to some of the unequal things. They didn't have clothes, and they were from the farm and everything, so they kind of stood out, and they didn't want to go. But the girls stayed in school and worked. I was the only one that didn't work very hard physically because I was the youngest of 12. So I stayed home, and I was able to study harder than the rest of them. And I love books. I always had a love of books because it came from my mother.
In spite of poverty and her family's hardships, Carrie Meek finished school and went on to college. Her mother's influence would continue to guide her, especially during the civil rights movement.
I had graduated, and I was back at Florida A&M that summer, and the marchers came by my mother's house, and she said, I really want to go. During that time, she wasn't able to walk that well. She says, I really want to go. She was very militant, even during those days, and she always knew what the struggle was all about. And she encouraged us to participate in it. But she didn't encourage us to do things that would have hurt us, in that she would discourage us from walking on the same side of the street downtown as the white people. She would say to you, don't go over there, she said, because they'll cause you trouble. And she wouldn't let my brothers even go downtown because she knew what a terrible place it was. And there was no place you could go to the bathroom. You couldn't try on a hat, you couldn't try on shoes, and she warned us. She kept us sort of, I guess, fortified against it. But yet we were just teeming with rage because of what was going on during those times.
Carrie Meek dedicated her career to helping others and fighting injustice. She became a teacher and earned her master's degree in public health and physical education. Later, she completed all the coursework for her doctorate. But Meek didn't stop there. She became the first African-American woman elected to Congress from the state of Florida.
Segregation kept us away from Congress. If we weren't from northern states or from western states, we couldn't get here. I came to Congress when I was 66 years old, and most women are retired when they're that age. But I was wide open when I got here. I was ready. I was really willing and able to be here. But I'm 75 now. Think of what I could have done. And I could have been here as long as some of these men have been here. Not as long as Jesse Helms, but I could have been here long enough to make a great difference.
I think the most significant thing for me about my childhood was when I got a rather severe case of rheumatic fever that had immobilized me, the pain and the joint swelling, so that I couldn't move. I couldn't move, and they had to carry me to the hospital. After I was in a hospital for about 3 months, I spent another 2 or 3 months in a convalescent home in Far Rockaway, Long Island, where I had a lot of negative experiences because they were so bigoted. I was the only black kid. They were always calling me names. Every word they knew that was derogatory, to the point that it got so bad, I became very depressed about it. And one day, one of the kids called me a nigger, and I just started crying. Just broke down and started crying. And I was very homesick, and I went running into the head nurse or assistant head nurse and crying and sobbing. And she said, "What's the matter?" And I said, the kids keep calling me a nigger. And she looked at me and she said, well, aren't you a nigger?
Poussaint recovered from his illness and was finally able to leave the convalescent home. He went on to pursue a career in medicine, and it was during his postgraduate studies at UCLA that he was asked to help provide medical care to civil rights workers in the South.
They needed a physician, and throughout my residency, I moonlighted at clinics, so I knew general medicine. I knew how to treat everything. I knew how to sew up lacerations. I knew all that stuff.
But when he signed on for the job, he had no idea how much his medical expertise would be needed.
In Canton, Mississippi, King and Stokely and Floyd McKissick and them and were talking on a schoolyard, and Andrew Young had come around and said, we think they're going to arrest King and the leaders tonight, and we have to be able to continue the march.
Before there was any warning, state troopers stormed the area.
Suddenly, they went in and flung on gas masks and stopped firing at the crowd, tear gas canisters, and it was bedlam. But the most wrenching thing to me, we ran out, went to the field, tried to get people, particularly on the ground. And little kids, like 1 year old, had got detached from their mothers and their parents and the bedlam, and they were running around saying, I'm blind, because they couldn't see because the tear gas burned their eyes so bad. And all of these people, as the tear gas cleared, were lying out there. One of my medical students was unconscious, and my ambulance driver was unconscious. Stokely was in an absolute rage that the police had done this. He was sick of it. Unprovoked attack. Didn't care whether there were little babies in the crowd. Nothing.
A few days later, Stokely and the other civil rights leaders appeared before the national press.
And Stokely was still in a rage, and they asked him the question. And Stokely looked at him, and Willie Ricks looked at him, and TV cameras were on. And Stokely put up his fist and said, "Black power, black power, black power."
Alvin Poussaint never forgot that night and continued to work to end segregation, particularly in hospitals and healthcare facilities. Today, he is on the faculty of Harvard University Medical School and is one of the nation's leaders in the field of psychiatric medicine.
As much as we would like things to take place immediately, they don't. And that you have to just, you have to stick with it, you don't quit, and you realize that any good that you do is important and educational.
The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was founded at a conference that Dr. King and Ella Baker had called together, but there was never a formal relationship between SCLC and King and SNCC, even though many of King's lieutenants wanted us to be the youth wing of SCLC, but we wanted independence. And we were urging people in the rural South who had just been able to register to vote in the last year or two, and finally by 1965, when the Voting Rights Act passes, able to vote at all in most places, and we're saying, you can be the sheriff. And they'd say, well, I only have a high school education. And we'd say, well, this cracker who's the sheriff now can barely read and write, so how come you can't be the sheriff? And we were encouraging people to run in their home communities, and I lived in Atlanta, and there was a court decision which reapportioned the Georgia legislature, created these brand new districts, no incumbents. In an adjacent district, a friend of mine, Ben Brown, was running for the House, and he said, Bond, you ought to run. And I ran for the legislature, and I won the election. In December of '65, SNCC issued an anti-war statement, which, if I read it to you today, would be mild in the extreme, but at the time sounded like an extreme statement. And members of the legislature objected. They filed a challenge to my seating. When I presented myself to be sworn in on the first day, they asked me to stand aside. They convened a hearing on the floor of the House, and they voted 185 to 12 to throw me out, declared my seat vacant, and called for a new election. I ran in the election, I won the election, and they threw me out again. And by that time I had filed a suit And it's heard by a 3-judge federal court, and the 2 judges appointed by President Kennedy voted against me, and the judge appointed by President Eisenhower voted for me, and we appealed it to the Supreme Court. In December of '66, they voted 9-0 to seat me, and in January of '67, I got in.
Now that he was in the Georgia State Legislature, Julian Bond faced even more roadblocks.
Initially, I was not accepted because I got in by the order of the Supreme Court. And the idea the court ordered this guy to be seated there just drove them nuts. But over time, after about a year or so, these other people began to say, this guy is a vote. He's a vote for me or a vote against me. And particularly in committee where the numbers are small, where one vote can make a difference, the smarter ones decide to talk to me. And after I'd been there about 5 years, one guy said to me, he said, you know, Bond, that time we voted you out of here, what was that all about? And I wanted to say, you stupid son of a bitch, if you don't know what it was all about, how come you did it?
Julian Bond ended up being a member of the Georgia State Legislature for 20 years. By the way, during the 1968 presidential election, Bond was the first African American to be nominated for Vice President of the United States. However, he was too young to serve. Today, Bond is chairman of the NAACP and serves as President Emeritus of the Southern Poverty Law Center. He's also a scholar in residence at American University and teaches at the University of Virginia.
When you have right on your side, you can prevail. You won't always, but you can prevail. And that, you know, I think I was armed mostly by, I was right. These people had no right to do this to me. I was right, they were wrong, and right prevailed.
I remember when I was about 5 or 6, coming home from school, 2 policemen in a car drove up, stopped, come here, boy. And I turned and went to them, get in. I got in the car, and they drove me down to the police station. And I got out of the car and went in with them. They were not threatening, and I wasn't frightened by them. And when we got inside, you know, they were about their business, and there were others, and they acted as if I was just a kid hanging around. And finally, they told jokes, and I laughed at them. And then one of them took syrup and poured it on my head, and another gave me some peanut brittle and put me on the streets and told me, go home now, don't get in any devilment. And I did. And although I was 5 or 6, I didn't tell my mama or my daddy. I knew that something had been done to me that defined me in a way. But I knew not to tell them. So I swallowed that. But I always knew that that really was meant to tell me that I was a nigger and that I had a place and that I should keep in that place.
While the experience stayed with Davis for the rest of his life, he never allowed it to define him or hold him back.
In the fall of 1935, I entered Howard University. I didn't have an overcoat. I had very little of the means and the wherewithal to survive, but it didn't seem to bother me. The people on the campuses were extremely friendly. It was wonderful, absolutely delightful. I studied with Dr. Alain Leroy Locke, who was head of the Department of Philosophy. Locke was the first Black Rhodes Scholar ever. I passed one of his examinations, and evidently he was impressed by what he saw on the paper and invited me to his office, sat me down, said, young man, what are you going to do with yourself? And I told him I wanted to be a writer. He said, writer? Write what? I want to write plays. He was slightly taken aback. He said, where are you from? He'd already heard the Bigfoot country accent in my voice. I said, I'm from Waycross, Georgia. He said, I don't mean Waycross. Well, yeah, Waycross, but where? I said, that's the name of the town. He said, you want to write, you say? Yes. Write plays for the theater? So, yeah. Have you ever been in the theater? Oh, yeah. Every Saturday night in Waycross, you used to go to see the cowboy pictures. No. Live people up on the stage, actors in a play up on stage. You never saw? I said, no, sir. And you're going to write plays, and you never even saw them, but I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I'll tell you what you do. When you finish here, you go to New York, where the theater is. Go to Harlem, and there's a little theater group there called the Rose McClendon Players. You tell them I sent you. Ask them to let you join. If they let you join, then join the company. And once you join, you do everything that's possible for you to do. Act, sing, dance, build scenery, paint, sets, hustle lemonade, push program, whatever. And this, to me, was such wisdom. I mean, this was what I had really come to college to find out. So once he told me that, I decided to go to New York, find this little place.
Ossie Davis became a writer, director, actor, and producer. Today, he enjoys a successful career in theater, film, and television. He has also written and directed movies, including Cotton Comes to Harlem. In addition, Davis is an activist and has worked tirelessly for social justice. Just a few of his many awards and honors include a National Medal for the Arts and a Screen Actors Guild Lifetime Achievement Award.
Dr. Du Bois had a marvelous saying that means a great deal to me. He speaks of life lit by some large vision of goodness, beauty, and truth. And I would like black folks to participate in that life, in that beauty, in that truth, in that goodness. The dance of existence, I would like us to be in it. The songs that need to be sung, I'd like us to sing. The paintings, I'd like us to help paint them.
May the stories you have heard inspire you to pursue your dreams and achieve success. Remember, many have gone before us whose struggles were so much greater, and they made it. You can too. I'm James Avery.